Damn, now that was a Rick and Morty episode. A fully unexpected lore bomb mid-season. Maybe the show is evolving a little bit, not just giving us a decisive Rick Prime storyline, but the return of Evil Morty. I know I haven't been keeping up with the new season via breakdowns like I did last year, but obviously I couldn't just not talk about this one. As much as I've been mixed on the last few seasons of the show as a whole, I cannot deny that when they dive into the full canonical lore-focused episodes, they deliver. So let's break through the central finite curve and talk about Unmortricken, probably the best Rick and Morty episode of the past few years. And of course, there will be major spoilers for the newest episode, so yeah, you know the drill. Okay, so this latest Rick and Morty did so much that worked for me. Not only did they drop some major lore bombs and shed significant light on Rick's past and motivations, but the episode is actually wildly subversive in an incredibly effective way, basically throwing everything we anticipated for the show moving forward out the window, leaving us in a much more interesting place for both our characters and for the overarching story. The episode opens with what looks like another typical Morty and Rick conflict, only to reveal that this is in the past and that it isn't our Morty, it is Evil Morty. We actually get to see the events of him taking over his Rick's body and moving through the early stages of his plans, removing himself from the Citadel's database, and of course kidnapping countless Mortys prior to the events of Close Encounters of the Rick Kind, his first appearance back in season 1. This entire sequence has heavily repurposed footage, but also gives us a few tidbits that shed more light on the events between what we've already seen. One of my favorite details is the reveal that Evil Morty's enslaved Rick tries to take his own life, which adds a lot of context to his final words in that one episode.
Do your worst, you little bastards! Kill me! Do it! Do it!
Obviously, they also move through the events of his presidential bid on the Citadel, which began in Season 3's Rick Lantis mix-up and concluded in Season 5's finale, Rick Mirai Jack. I really love this entire cold open. Completely establishes the vibe of the episode. No usual title sequence, just, hey, this is an Evil Morty episode, buckle up. It's also very unexpected to bring him back just a season and a half later, in my opinion. It really felt like we were just moving on to Rick Prime as the primary antagonist, and that is the other way that this episode is just a massive subversion, but we'll get there eventually. We also get a little glimpse of Evil Morty's life outside the central finite curve, and what ropes him back into the story is our Rick's hunt for Rick Prime, which disrupts the integrity of the curve itself. For me, finally putting Evil Morty and Rick Prime together in a single episode actually really highlights the differences between these two major series antagonists, and to me, showcases that Evil Morty is a lot more compelling. That isn't to say I don't like Rick Prime. His place in the story is super important. He represents the entirety of our Rick's lasting trauma. It's arguably the most important aspect of Rick's backstory, but that is so much more about our Rick than it is about Rick Prime, and it's the reason the subversions in these episodes work so well. But we also get even more context for that trauma, with the reveal that Rick Prime didn't just kill Diane, he erased her from every universe with the Omega device. I had always wondered why we had never met Diane in any incarnation, and I think this reveal adds a lot of weight to Rick's backstory. I also love that this episode once again goes out of its way to differentiate our Rick from all others in a new way. They actually establish that Rick isn't the only other Rick hunting down Rick Prime. However, he is the only other Rick besides Rick Prime that invented portal travel himself.
I do miss when it was just us, the only two Ricks who actually invented portal travel.
I love this because it establishes that though our Rick shares characteristics with all these other kinds of Ricks, he is basically one of a kind in the culmination of those characteristics. He's potentially as intelligent and powerful as Rick Prime, but he's different because he's one of the Ricks who has those emotional connections weighing on him. And as this episode firmly establishes, that sort of is the most important thing about our Rick. It's not just that he's capable, it's that he's got these strong emotional connections that drive him, even when he doesn't want to admit it. Avenging his slain family is his primary motivation, and though it seemed like that could have been a good through line moving towards the end of the series, I think what they end up doing here is far more interesting. And again, we'll touch on that towards the end of the episode. Honestly, another highlight of the episode was just seeing Rick and Evil Morty work together. They make a real point to show that they're on entirely comparable levels as interdimensional threats. Both manage to survive Rick Prime's Gladiator death box, both make adjustments to their combined portal guns to escape. It's cool to see Evil Morty actually in action, since so much of what we've seen or known about him previously is mostly inferred from the results of his actions, especially considering Evil Morty is actually the one to take out Rick Prime using the old switcheroo.
Well, why am I wearing an eye patch? And wait, did we switch shirts?
Yeah,
Thanks for the assist.
I really think this episode showcases so thoroughly why Evil Morty is such a better big bad than Rick Prime. Prime is vitally important to Rick's story, but he's also a coward who uses his abilities to hide and fight from afar. While Evil Morty did leave the central finite curve, it wasn't because he's scared of any of his enemies. The moment he had to return, he did it without issue, without breaking a sweat, really. Evil Morty has no fear of our Rick, no fear of Rick Prime, and he showed exactly why. He will use his abilities and intelligence to do whatever it takes to give himself his own Rick-free lifestyle and interdimensional retirement that he craves. And in this episode, he takes out the two biggest threats to him in one fell swoop. Ingeniously, might I add. By subduing Rick Prime, he actually gives Rick the chance to follow through with his revenge. And while doing that, Evil Morty basically uses the opportunity to steal the schematics and vital components for the Omega device, which effectively gives him the upper hand in every interdimensional conflict, and particularly over our Rick. Harmon said it best in the Inside the Episode video.
Evil Morty is actually the more powerful villain, and powerful villains don't just hide from you or fight you, they own you.
Since Rick chose vengeance, killing Rick Prime with his bare hands in an outrageously violent scene, might I add, he gave Evil Morty the opportunity to seize absolute power over him.
Just don't force me to improve on the design. I can end the Rick experiment anytime I want.
Narratively, this bait and switch was so effective. I really thought that Rick Prime was the guy moving forward. It kinda made sense that Rick would have to take on Rick, taking aim towards the end of the series. But to briefly establish this guy as the ultimate baddie for just a season and a half, and then to casually bring back Evil Morty so that he can brazenly take him out himself, and establish pure dominance over all of the multiverse, badass. What a great villain. But despite this clear assertion of dominance from Evil Morty, the most important aspect of the story and how it will affect the show moving forward is how it affects Rick himself. His entire existential motivation was getting revenge on Prime for his lost family.
How's it feel? Better? No? Exactly the same? Yeah, it always does.
This final sequence is such an incredible cherry on top of an already excellent episode, bringing back the Mazzy Star song from Rick Potion number 9 to showcase the shift in Rick moving forward. This is so smart. I love how this show uses their established storytelling choices to not just invoke emotional responses, but convey the ideas really cleanly. Rick Potion number 9 was the first game-changing episode of Rick and Morty. It marks when Morty learns the true nature of the multiverse and is faced with the realization that he is a tiny part of a much larger world. It marks when his entire concept of how the world works, who he is, who his family is torn to shreds. And that final sequence is one of my favorites in the entire series. It conveys his existential dread so thoroughly. By using the same song again, now shifting the focus to Rick, it conveys that exact feeling. Rick's entire purpose is upended, now that he's finally achieved this one goal. He's a dog who finally caught the car he was chasing, and it's what makes the subversive nature of this episode so compelling, because now, as a character, Rick is faced with the same kind of life-shattering shift that Morty was faced with back in season 1, and Rick will be forced to figure out what is actually important to him. And based on the tease of next week's episode, it looks like Rick is really struggling with this. We haven't seen Rick drink a ton in the last few seasons, and here he is just completely wasted off his ass the moment his life has changed.
Need me for any adventures?
Huh?
Adventures? Remember those?
Oh, yeah, not right now, Morty.
I gotta say, no matter how disillusioned I become with this show, they always manage to rope me back in when they drop these big lore-focused episodes. They really never drop the ball on the most important overarching narrative-driven stories. Just a phenomenal episode of Rick and Morty, and hopefully one that shifts the show in ways that I continue to find compelling even in the non-lore-driven episodes. This big change for Rick could be a huge opportunity for the series, in my opinion. But we'll see. But what did y'all think about Unmortricken? Did you love it as much as I did? Let me know below in the comments, and maybe I'll cover more Rick and Morty this season if I feel like it. Peace.
Don't worry about it. Let's just see where this goes.
I stay mellow watching Johnny two cellos. He talks cartoons, he's a really cool fellow. He keeps you posted on adult cartoons. If that's what you're into, then grab a spoon and a very big bowl of your favorite cereal. Feels like Saturday morning cartoon material. Johnny two cellos, watch him on YouTube. Now enjoy this groove and bust a move.